Thank you.
Well, most of my talk's been stolen already, of course.
Really sorry.
But I want to talk about happiness is a serious business. And so I'm Nick. I founded this company called Happiness Works about 2.5 years ago. I mean, I say a company, a business, you know, it's a sort of money drain at the moment when you're doing a startup. You know, these things don't exactly always start as you want them to. But my background is that I'm a statistician. I worked at a think tank in London called New Economics Foundation since about the year 2000, and I was asked to do some work on what was called well-being, and basically I was asked, think tanks compete for meaning. That's what we do. We're trying to look at how we can get meaning into policy and how does it represent the values that our think tank stands for. So I was asked to drive some meaning under the word well-being. And being a statistician, I wanted to put numbers under there about people's experience of life. So I spent really the last 15 years trying to persuade governments, statisticians, statistics authorities that they actually need to measure things differently. And things like David Cameron's policy on well-being and the fact the Office of National Statistics measures well-being as part of my team's, well, it was the things we were campaigning for anyway. But about 5 years ago, I started to think about business, and it led to a train of thought about could we take these skills about measuring people's quality of life and take them into the business arena. And about 2.5 years ago, I left the think tank and set up my own business. Really, I'm going to talk to you about happiness at work, about happiness generally, and what are some numbers around that, and why numbers are good at making it something which seems so sort of up there. Is grounding it. You know, part of the language of business is numbers. So can we create good numbers around something that really matters, like people's experience of work? So I think that nearly everybody gets that miserable people do miserable work. You know, we get this. We understand that that is a waste of potential. And we kind of get that happy people, you know, happy, passionate people do great things. But the problem is that there's actually not many people that are really, really fulfilled at work. And a lot of people are sort of going along okay. And the thing with okay is that there aren't any fires. There aren't any tantrums. There's no big bad signals going on. But okay is not okay in terms of performance and in terms for the individual, for the organization. So there's nothing terribly wrong, but there's nothing terribly right either. And that's the trap I think that most organizations, a lot of organizations get into. So I want to talk about happiness, and actually I would dispute the fact that happiness is different for everybody. You know, this is actually my best mate, Pete. Okay? And Pete, when he was talking at my 50th the other last year, yeah, I know I don't look 50, but anyway, he goes to me, he goes, the reason that Nick chooses me as a friend is because I'm balder and fatter than him. And he is a big man, but he has a huge heart, and he's a lovely man. And we can all recognize that he is happy. We can see the wrinkles around his eyes. He is just embodying it at this moment. And what I would put to you is that happiness is a universal human experience, that every human being on this planet experiences happiness, recognizes it, knows what it is. And so we can be sure that if every human being experiences this, then this is a highly functional thing for humans to do. Because otherwise, I know evolution doesn't have a purpose, but there wouldn't be the investment over millennia in human beings to experience emotions unless they were useful. And in fact, you know, lots of research and archaeological research and all sorts of things is showing that emotions come before cognition in human beings. Human beings were compassionate before we were rational. We're emotional creatures first. It's a lot of the reasons that you know, I mean, kids, you know, when they're very, very young, have strong emotions long before they have words and things like that. They are emoting. And you know, we understand that things like anger and fear are part of the fight and flight mechanism. That when we feel angry, we're basically responding to a situation that someone's violated a norm for us. They've overstepped a mark for us. It makes something feels unfair, and we have a response of anger, and anger is experienced in the body. All emotions, the difference between emotions, one of the fundamental difference between emotions and cognition is that emotions are experienced in the body because they ready us to act. An emotion like anger is giving us energy so we can respond. Maybe effectively humans do have the capacity to physically respond to things, and anger is allowing us to do that. Fear is about a threat in the environment, and we feel frightened, and there's lots of rational, functional responses to fear. One of them is freeze, so that the predator doesn't see us. Another is to run very fast away. Another one, which psychology missed for about 40 years in its history, because during the 1920s to about the 1960s, a lot of psychologists didn't want to study women because they were too emotional. And women tend to have a fear response which is slightly different than men, and it would be more to group together and respond to a fear together. So there's a sort of a circle that gets made. So these are highly functional things that are experienced in human beings. And another one, which is perhaps more less obvious, but sadness is a natural human emotion. It's about the loss of a support system. And we experience sadness as a draining of energy in the body. Why is that functional? Well, if you've just lost a support system, it would be dysfunctional to run around with a lot of energy and find a new one straight away. So actually it pays us as an organism to slow down, sometimes for months. Grief is a natural process. It pays us to slow down, to reflect, to think about what was good about the loss we have, in the sense that the experience of sorrow and sadness is really a function of how happy and how joyful we had been. It's that loss which we are experiencing. And so a slowing down helps us reflect on that. So what's the function of happiness? It must also be functional. It's not only an outcome. Okay, we like to feel happy. It is an outcome. We do feel happy when something's gone well. But happiness is also going to drive things for us. And we use the word happiness to mean actually a whole range of emotions, positive emotions, right from a low energy one like contentment, right up to a very high energy one like enthusiasm or joy. The word happiness can catch all of those. But something like enthusiasm is about mobilizing energy to seize an opportunity. We have a lot of energy when we're enthusiastic, and we actually transmit that energy to other people. We've spotted some berries that need harvesting or prey that needs hunting. We're enthusiastic around that possibility, and we mobilize our energy to do it. Contentment or satisfaction is a reflective process, particularly when something's gone well, and we're learning our lessons so that we can do that again. Some emotions are sort of in the middle there, like interest. Interest is a focusing emotion, which helps us commit to a task which might well be challenging, that might stretch us. And actually we might be some short-term pain, some short-term concentration that needs to happen to achieve something. So interest helps us focus, do that. So all of these emotions are highly, highly functional. And so when we talk about happiness, we mustn't throw out babies with bathwaters, and start thinking that the negative emotions are dysfunctional, because they're not. They're appropriate in all sorts of ways. Now, there's another thing going on here in this picture, which is that, we can see that Pete is happy, and as I said, it's functional. It's functional for him. But it's also something that happens between us. I mean, one of the reasons that Pete is happy in this picture is because he's with me. But the point really is that happiness is almost a social emotion. There's this sort of nonsense that goes on that happiness is selfish. It's actually not at all what happens with human beings, is that we express joy much more in relationship with other people. It's almost a social emotion. In fact, if you walk down the street laughing to yourself, you look mad. Whereas if you're doing it with another person, it's the most natural thing in the world. And emotions are contagious. Literally. We pick up other people's emotions and we coordinate our emotions with them. And there's a sort of famous idea that Kevin Bacon particularly made famous, but that we have 6 degrees of separation from every other human being on the planet. And it's roughly right, by the way. Emotions travel in a group to 3 degrees of separation, which means that my emotional experience affects my friend, which affects their friend, which affects their friend. And for most of us, that's roughly 2,000 people that we affect and we are affected by. So in an organisation, emotions are going to ripple round a group. That's just going to happen quite naturally all the time. And in fact, if you want to know what the fastest moving emotion is, it's anger. That's the most rapid moving emotion in a group. And sadness is one of the slower ones. And happiness is in between. It's quite fast moving. So if you're in an organisation and you have someone on the front desk that's going to greet everybody, for goodness sake, put a joyful soul on the front desk, yeah? Because everyone's going to walk past this person every day. And don't do what an organisation did that I visited the other month, which is that they had subcontracted the front desk to a security firm who were grim and, in their uniforms every day. And everyone walks into the business every day and has to sign in and is miserable before they've even got in the door, A friend of mine put out a job for the person running his front desk, and he called the job Director of First Impressions. And, that's the first impression that people have come in. And the thing with first impressions is there's never second chance. That's an old joke. But, so these things travel around a lot. And if you want to know about that work, there's a very good little TED talk called Connected by Nicholas Christakis. And basically, the research is coming from something called the Framlington Health Study. And it's a big study in the USA where they looked at the contagion of behaviours. So things like if you want to lose weight, hang out with slim people, yeah? People that eat well. Don't hang out with people like me, yeah? Hang out, if you want to give up smoking, hang out with non-smokers, yeah? And if you want to be happy, hang out with happy people. Some people in life feel like radiators, and some people feel like drains, and all sorts of people in between, and also that is obviously contextual sometimes. But it's not particularly good fun being married to a drain, because you end up losing all your energy in life. And it's not much fun working with someone who's a drain. Yeah, we've all had colleagues that just suck the life out of us sometimes, and that's what's going on. So look, happiness matters, okay? It is highly functional. It is also contagious. But what do we know about happiness at work? I'm a researcher, I'm an empiricalist, I like data. And there is quite a lot of data on happiness at work, and we can talk sometimes about what the measurements mean and what they don't mean, but there's a lot of work on, Gallup do a lot of work on engagement. And my sort of take-home difference between engagement and happiness is that I think they're two sides of the same coin. They're highly correlated as constructs. The difference really is engagement's focusing a little bit more on behavior, and happiness is focusing a bit more on emotional experience. And engagement is fundamentally the organization's agenda. It's almost a code word for performance. When you're asking, are your employees engaged, you're sort of asking, are they performing? Well, people are not stupid. So if you're asking them engagement surveys and things like that, and you're saying, do you go the extra mile? They do realize that you're trying to get more out of them for the same money. And a lot of them will resist that. It's not exactly a tempting offer to them. So if you want to actually engage them, I think the best way is to ask them whether they enjoy their work. Are they happy there? Because then it feels like you want to give them something. And that is a totally different energy than trying to extract something out of them. And it's why I think the word engagement is sort of, I know I might be ahead of the curve here, but I think it's going to die as a word in organizations because it's really just the organization's agenda. But Gallup do a measure, and it's called perceptions of work. They call it engagement, but actually if you look at the questions, it is about behavior, and it is very related to happiness at work. But they have shed loads of data. So I'm going to quote their stats here and sort of take it as being roughly the same as happiness at work. I actually think happiness at work is likely to have slightly bigger effects than this. But they have 37% less absenteeism when they are comparing sort of teams which are low engagement for them versus high engagement for them. Gallup low engagement teams, by the way, are almost spot on the US average. If you look at the engagement scores for their low engagement teams, they're almost exactly the US average. So they're basically explaining the difference between okay and great here. So 37% lower absenteeism. What's going on there? Well, we all know that when we're stressed, we get sick. But what you might not know is that, I'm not saying you're not happy, but when you're happy, you're less likely to get a cold. And they've literally done these experiments where they have exposed people to the common cold virus, and they've looked who catches it and who doesn't. And we know we get ill when we're stressed, but the opposite we don't really recognise, that actually our happiness, when we're feeling good, we are protected against all sorts of viruses. So you get sick less. You also recover from illnesses better if you're happier. You recover from accidents better. What's going on there? You know, it's not that happiness is something magical, it's that happy people tend to have good social support networks around them. And if you've got people that love you and care about you, they're going to remind you to take your medications, they're going to remind you to do your exercises, they're going to get you to the doctor and all sorts of things, which means that your recovery time is going to be better. And if you look at some data on life expectancy and happiness, the suggestion is that happy people, compared to the average, live about 7 to 12 years longer. That's bigger positive effect than smoking as a negative effect. And so, you know, if you look at smokers, they often have strong social networks. If you're married to a smoker and you love them and they love you, they're worth much more to you as a friend than they are a negative that you might get a bit of passive smoking. It's a massive effect, much more positive effect. So, and luckily for guys like me that are happy and plump, you know, it's much more of a predictor of longevity than body mass index is a suppression. So it's a huge, huge effect. You also see things like staff turnover being lower. Obviously, fairly obvious this, you don't leave a job you love. I mean, that's just obvious. People obviously leave for some other reasons. There's a big difference between high turnover and low turnover sectors. High turnover sectors, you know, such as coffee shops and restaurants in London, happiness doesn't have much of an effect because people are only there for a while anyway, so they sort of last it out. But more stable jobs, this becomes a bigger effect, actually. You get fewer accidents at work. Well, what's going on there? Well, if you are happy at work and you care about your work, you're going to pay more attention. You know, we actually all know that we're more likely to fall over and hurt ourselves when we're unhappy, when we're stressed, when we're rushing, when we're doing this. But if you're in a good mood and you're happy and you're enjoying your life, you actually take more care. You take more self-care. Take more care of others. We see lower in nursing situations in wards. We see lower death rates on wards which are happy, because the nursing staff are more aware of what's going on. They have a faster critical response time to emergency, and they deal with their patients better, and that makes a huge impact on death rates and things like that. If you care about your machine, if you're a machine operator, you care about it, you will hear that something's not quite right in the machine and you will pay attention to that. If you don't care, you'll actually want it to go wrong so you can go and get a coffee break while the engineer comes. So accidents are things. And thefts, politely called shrinkage in the business. Shrinkage is lower. You don't steal from a company you like. And then you get higher productivity. Gallup claimed 21%. Productivity is so difficult to measure at a team level. There's huge differences between different types of jobs about how accurately you can do this. So I've seen figures as low as 11 or 12% when it's more of a manual task where you are doing a repetitive task, but there is still a 10% productivity gain there. In more creative industries, I've seen figures up to 40, 60%, some claims. Definitely, creative thought is about the ability to put things together, and you don't do that when you're in a foul mood. When you're in a foul mood, you're very narrow thinking. When you're in a good mood, you're open to that. And that's not to say that creative thoughts don't come after suffering, but they don't happen during suffering, okay? They happen afterwards when you're back out of that situation. So higher productivity. And you had better customer service. Gallup say 10%. I don't know how they're measuring customer service. I'm not sure if they're using a net promoter value or something like that. I actually find that remarkably low. I actually think that, you've got two variables which are a little bit difficult to measure related together. All the impacts are positive, but I would think that in service industries where your employees are effectively your offering, in the sense it's the relationship between the service provider and the service user, that actually happiness at work is absolutely critical. We all know that customer service is related to lots of goodies like word of mouth marketing, lower costs of sales, all that sort of stuff. So customer service is obviously critical. All of that data is looking at lots of teams, and it's looking at their perceptions of work, engagement, happiness, and these other variables. But statistically, we talk about the fact that correlation is not causality. This is the fact that that teams that are engaged, happy, have these higher performances. It doesn't say which one's causing which. The critical data we want to know really is which one is driving the other. Because if high-performing teams are happier because they're high-performing, and we all do feel good when we've achieved something, that's interesting, but it's not as interesting as the other way round. Well, there is some data, again from Gallup, and it's a very big data set. Can't quite see it down here, but it's 140,000 people. That's a big data set. I wish I had that many. We've got about 40,000 in our data set, so nearly, but not as good data as this, not as clean data as this. Happiness at time 1, performance at time 1, and happiness at time 2 and performance at time 2. Clearly teams that are happy at time 1 are likely to be happy at time 2. It's going to be a stability here, and performance as well. So we expect that happiness at time 1 will predict happiness at time 2. But we're interested in what's called the cross correlations. This is something called structural equation modeling or pathway analysis if you're a statistician. And we're looking at, is happiness at time 1 adding extra predictive value to this variable here? Or is it performance to happiness? Or is it both? And the reality is that both models fitted the data, but that model 1 was much better. So happiness was predicting performance more than performance was predicting happiness. In fact, this is a guy called Jim Harter from Gallup. He's not the most radical guy in the world, but he's going, the impact of this data is that they suggest that the impact of happiness at work on performance is twice as large as from performance to happiness at work. That is startling. That is not business as usual. The normal business function is that, we'll make high-performing teams and they will be happier. In fact, that's our general mantra of life in the West, which is that, if you work hard and you earn lots of money, you will be happy. If you work hard, you can retire and be happy. If you work hard, you can be happy at the weekends and spend your money. We kick happiness out into the spaces. If a lot of our religions suggest, if you're good this life, you'll be happy in the next life. Happiness doesn't seem to be very accepted in the moment. But this is suggesting that actually the goal is not happiness. Happiness is the path. That would be more Buddhist, There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way, is a famous Buddhist phrase. So, and there's actually statistical data for this. And so I would suggest that happiness matters, but somehow it's still not being taken seriously. It still feels a crazy idea. To put the words happiness and work in the same sentence is provocative still. And yet it's hugely, hugely important. And I can actually show you data about how this is being systematically missed in our economy. This is a business magazine. It's called Business Week in the States. It's sort of a typical investment rag, really. But this analyst in there goes that the management are focused on the employees to the detriment of shareholders. And he goes, why would I want to buy a stock like that? And this is a typical attitude, the short-termism in the market. I want my shareholder value, and I want it this quarter. Well, he was talking about Costco, one of the big supermarkets in the US, and I'm not a huge fan of big supermarkets, but a lot of them have fantastic employment programs. Costco regularly comes in the Great Place to Work list in the US. And the CEO at that time, he's actually now left, called Jim Senegal, said, I happen to believe that in order to reward the shareholder in the long term, you have to please your customers and your employees. That is your route to shareholder value. Okay. In fact, I would say you have to please your employees to please your customers. Okay. But that was what he was saying. Well, someone's gone out and tested this in a fantastic piece of research. A guy I met him the other week actually called Alex Edmonds, and he looked at the stock market performance of companies that are in the Great Place to Work list, and he looked at it over a period from 1998, which was the first year that Forbes magazine published it, right up to 2008. And what he did was he created a benchmark, and the benchmark is quite difficult to create. But basically, you have to look at those companies in the 100 best places to work, and you have to find their market equivalents for each company. And the list changes each year, so you've sort of got a game where you're sort of buying a pseudo stock portfolio on January 1st, if that's when it's released, and you're selling it on December the 31st. That's the game he's playing. This is his benchmark over that period. Okay, and this is the great places to work. And that is a huge difference. It's about, over that period, if you'd invested $100 at the beginning, you got 180 this way, you got 240 the other way. That is Warren Buffett style sort of extra returns. It's about between 2 and 4% extra return every year. There are a couple of years where it does less well than others, but that's the average. Alpha is called. Alpha is the extra explained variance of it. And so the guy at the beginning, and I'm absolutely sure it was a guy who was that stock analyst, was not even doing his job. That is in the marketplace, that data. They always talk about having perfect information in the marketplace, and he was ignoring it and was losing out on huge value. So if you know anyone who's an investor, you should tell them start looking at what's the experience of employees in those companies, because that will predict performance. So happiness matters, and so you can see it at that big level about a stock market level, but actually how much does it cost a company to be only okay? So when you're only okay, you lose days through sickness, you have higher costs of recruitment, you have reduced productivity, you also will have things like reduced sales, lower customer service, and less innovation. So even if you just estimate something very, very small, very, very modest here, and you put some figures around it, so you say, okay, we will have 1 day less a year sick per an employee. We'll have a 10% reduction in staff turnover. We'll have a 5%, this is the reduction as the cost, but a 5% increase in productivity. Yeah? These ones I put sort of figures, but I haven't actually included them in the next figure because they're difficult to estimate, and I do want to do sometime a good estimate on these first two, but I actually haven't done it. You have to sort of model things quite carefully. So I haven't even included those figures in here. But I want to estimate the cost of unhappiness. Now you may not know, but the average size of a company in the UK is 275 employees. There's 31 million people that work in the UK economy. If you line them up with those that work in small companies at one end, those in big others, the 15.5 millionth employees in a company about 275 people. That's an average size company. Well, if you look at the cost for that company, it's about £600,000 every year that is costing them from only being okay, and those very, very modest assumptions I made. And that works out at about £200 per an employee per month for just being okay. And it's not even, I'm taking such modest assumptions there. If you've got someone unhappy, they might be costing you thousands a month, that individual. But if you've got a company that's okay, you're probably losing at least £200 per person per month from just being okay. If you added that to the UK economy, that's 50 billion from being okay to just being a step towards happiness. Now, happiness matters, but unless we can actually think about what makes us happier at work, what's the point? If we all just come into work and we're genetically programmed to be one way or another or something like that, or we can't impact it, then it doesn't really matter. But of course we can. And we're coming up really with what we call 5 ways to happiness at work. A bit like, what are your 5 fruit and vegetables a day? But 5 is a relatively good number here, by the way, and I'm going to come back to your list in a minute, because you did get 3, but you missed 2 in your list. Okay, so, and you actually, what nationality are you? Canadian. Okay, well, North Americans tend to miss at least one of these 2 that I'm going to point out to you. It's very typical in the US particularly, where more of the research is that they don't miss these, they miss 2 of these. Okay, so, and actually they are the first 2 that I'm going to talk about. The first thing about happiness at work, and you completely missed, my friend, is relationships. is connections, which is that we are relational beings, and our relationships with other people at work is an absolute critical indicator of our happiness at work. There's obviously the old mantra, people join organizations, they leave managers. If you're poorly managed or you don't get on with your colleagues, it's going to be hard for you to enjoy your work. And relationships are the most important, one of the biggest factors anyway. The second one, which you also missed, is be fair, which is that if organizations are not transparent, they don't treat people with respect, they don't pay fairly, this is a hygiene issue as much as anything else, but then you're just not going to get off the ground at all, And if you're not treated fairly, the emotional reaction is anger. When you feel that you are not treated fairly, or you feel a colleague hasn't been treated fairly, you get angry on their behalf. That is a sort of social contagion of emotions. And a story will reverberate around an organization very quickly about unfairness in an organization. It's really, really important to get right. And you need that base in any culture if you want to be happier. And then you start to get it right.
Well, that's good.
Okay, so the next one is empower.
I only had 20 minutes, remember?
Yeah. I reckon you read Daniel Pink and Drive. Because you hit the Daniel Pink 3, which are coming up now.
Good.
And of course, Daniel Pink didn't make these up either, by the way. They're basically classically out of something called self-determination theory. But whatever. Empower is about autonomy, is about people being able to choose. You talked about freedom to choose. To be yourself, to shape your work, to influence it, is very, very important. And when we feel empowered, we much more enjoy our work. The next one is to challenge people, to stretch them, about using their strengths, about learning new things, about achievement. I can't remember exactly what expression you used, but you were basically hitting this one here. And someone talked about growing and developing. Yeah, we like to be stretched. In fact, it's a fantastic experience when the challenge is just pulling us forward, almost by the nose into what we're doing, where our skills are really matched to the challenges we face. When we're too skillful for a challenge we face, we get bored because we're not using our skills. When we haven't got enough skills for the challenge, we get stressed and anxious because we don't have the ability to do it. There's a sweet spot in the middle there, often called flow. A very famous psychologist called Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And he talks about the flow experiences. Tennis players talk about being in the zone. Musicians lose themselves in the music. Statisticians like me lose ourselves in Excel spreadsheets. It's just the way we are. But if I do get into analysing data, hours can go by and I haven't noticed them going because I'm so engaged in my work. Challenge. And the last one is inspire, which is about a sense of purpose, the social value of your work, which is that we like to be part of something that is making a difference. We can see this in the data all over the place. People who are in caring professions are happier given all sorts of other things than people who are just in commerce, okay? In fact, sometimes the market exploits this. They get paid less, give up income to do those caring professions because this is where they get their buzz. So those are what they are, and actually really, if you want to use the sort of more psychological words, they're about relationships, or relatedness is one of the things. They're about fairness, about autonomy, mastery, purpose is what Daniel Pink talks about. Other people will use different words in here, but you can map these against, you can even put Maslow into this if you want to. This is not new. It's just a summary of lots and lots of work that's gone before about what are the sort of things that go. We frame them as these words really these to be more positive, active words that organizations can do. Connect, be fair, empower, challenge, and inspire. So another thing with Pete, and I told you this before, is happiness is visible. We can see he's happy. And really, as a statistician, I'm interested in, can organizations see how happy their employees are? One of my trainings in my 20s, that's a long time ago now, was I trained to be a psychotherapist. My mother was a family counsellor. My father was a businessman. I was a sort of statistician. I went and did a training in psychotherapy. I don't really know why, I can't remember, but I did. I loved it. And I did my 100 hours solo, but then I stopped because I became much more interested in systems. But really, the trick, if you want to call it a trick, of a counsellor, a therapist, a coach, is that they listen and they reflect back. It's really the main skill you learn as a counsellor. So listen to your client and reflect back to them so that the client can see themselves. Well, I'm interested in how statistics can do that for an organisation. In fact, I've talked for many years about the fact that our indicators are really helping a society see itself. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to make a system more aware of itself. And so that's what we're doing, really, is actually how can we do this in organisations? And we think there's actually a need for this because we've done some market research and that 50% of all UK employees have done a staff survey in the last 3 years. So there's a big market out for them. But the problem is that 80% of people who did them thought they made absolutely no difference to their working lives at all. That staff surveys were not making a positive impact on their work, and that they've become effectively a tick box exercise. And people, they wait weeks for reports. They do the survey, it's a long, boring form, and then, maybe about 3 months later, someone says, oh, our engagement scores are in. And it means there's months before any action happens at all. And so I will tease this sort of, or provoke this market and say that actually engagement surveys don't even hold the value they're trying to measure. They are disengaging processes. So if you're going to do something in this space, you have to do it differently. And so we're starting to do it differently. We've been running a Happiness at Work survey for about 2 or 3 years now. It gives instant reports. They're fun. Individuals get their own reports, a bit like Cosmo magazine. Mostly A's, mostly B's. What are your happiness drivers? But we're just starting to launch a new tool, which is even more radically different. And it's basically based on one simple daily question every day. And that was, how happy were you at work today? And people click, and it's just one click. It's sort of like an app. It's mainly delivered by email. Can be a physical installation. And people go, oh, you want to do it every day. But actually what happens is that people start to feel noticed, that that they're being asked every day, how was your day? And what happens is you start to instantly see results. This is an unhappy team. Only 25% of this team were happy this day. A happy team might be 100% happy. You can start to see time trends. This is actually my team's data. So Christmas, Steve was obviously working one day between Christmas and New Year. But basically we took the time off there. But you can start to see how data changes over time. And basically we think that the definitive people metric in an organisation is percentage of days worked that were happy. You can see that on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis. And it becomes a leading indicator in your company's KPIs. So that actually, instead of having lag indicators for people like absenteeism, like staff turnover, which you can only find out after a lot of time's gone by, you have an indicator which is changing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and you can start to understand which teams are doing well, which aren't, and you can start to attend them. We also do a climate survey, normally every month, but it can be less often, but it asks you questions that are important, like your work-life balance every month. And we'll start to produce instant reports that are based around those 5 ways. How well are you connected, being fair, empowered in that space. You can start to see yellow traffic lights, start to fix them that way. The next thing that becomes important is that, measurement is fine. I love measurement. I'm a statistician. I love 4 decimal places. It's not the most important thing ultimately. It's what are the conversations that gets generated by that? What new ideas do people have about how to work together? And do they actually change their behavior? Because you're only going to get happier at work if you change something. Otherwise, you're going to stay the same. So we have things where people can post their ideas about what's going to make happy. People can vote them. We're actually starting to build a whole evidence-based ideas bank that people can draw on what other organisations are doing, or what does the research say in this area, so that you can start to inspire you, because it is difficult sometimes to know what's going to be a good intervention in this space, and you can start to plot when they've been done. So one of our beta testing clients was called Forward Partners. They're a venture capital fund. I sort of went to them to see if they'd invest in us, but they were the wrong type of people. But they said, oh, we'll use your tool though. And they've been using it for about 3 months, right? And they're absolute fans of ours. And David Norris, the partner there, goes, the fact we asked every single person every day if they're happy means that their opinion counts. And they've started to have weekly discussions on which actions which were the best ideas to take into action. One of the partners said, we used to have this Friday stand-up, And we knew it was important. We knew we should be doing this, but we didn't know what we should be doing in the stand-up, really. And so I'd only give it like 5 out of 10. It was good to do. But he said, now we're using Mood Map, I'd give it 8 out of 10 because we got useful things to talk about every week. They've had a big discussion about their personal strengths, and they actually discovered that people had strengths they didn't even know were in the organization. You know, digital skills, you know, things that actually had commercial value. And people had come and they'd been doing a different job and they didn't know they'd done that before. And they've set targets such as that no one will leave the organization due to being unhappy. They might leave because they can get more money, they might leave because another reason, but they're not going to leave because they're not happy here. And that's a bold target, really. And Matt Buckland, who's head of talent there, you might have seen Matt Buckland's name in the press release. Did any of you see that tweet, which was karma, someone's just walked into my office? Yeah, did you see that one this week? Basically, he was interviewing someone, and this guy had pushed past him on the tube and told him to F off. And then the guy walked in to be interviewed by him, and he tweeted, perfect karma, the guy that just... Anyway, that's Matt Buckland, by the way. So I think it was retweeted like 30,000 times within a day. Anyway, he said these conversations happened because the tool existed. So it's moodmap.io, that's what it does. So really, just to recap, this is happiness. It is a universal human experience. Emotions and emotional fields exist in organizations, whether you want to take notice of them and respond to them or not, they are there. It's contagious, it's functional. Happy people deliver great results, but okay is actually not okay. And then probably one last point is that a friend of mine always says, the soft stuff is the hard stuff. Making people happier, helping people be happier at work is not easy. It requires effort, it requires commitment to that, it requires commitment to that process. You can't just do it by putting a table tennis table in or just buying people nice lunches. It is about a whole process around the organization and creating a great culture. But it is achievable and you can do it. So happiness is a serious business. Thank you.